The punch landed before anyone could say his name. A dull, wet sound cracked through the first-class cabin, sharp enough to cut the hum of the air conditioning. Heads snapped up. A woman gasped. Someone laughed, thinking it was a joke, the kind of ugly moment that turns into a viral clip by the time the plane pushes back from the gate. Blood splashed across beige leather. It ran warm and fast down the side of a man's face, dripping onto the sleeve of a grey hoodie that did not belong in seat 1A. At least, that's what everyone thought. Daniel Brooks didn't fall. He rocked back, hard, shoulder slamming into the window, breath knocked out of him in a silent burst. His vision flickered white, then red. He tasted iron. He kept his hands open, palms up. Still. Very still. Around him, time stuttered. "Jesus," someone muttered from the second row. A phone came up, then another. Little black rectangles pointed like weapons. Richard Collins stood in the aisle, chest heaving, knuckles already swelling around a heavy gold ring. His face was flushed, eyes glassy with rage and something older, something practiced. The kind of anger that had never been punished, the kind that had always worked. "You don't get to ignore me," Richard snapped, voice loud, shaking with adrenaline. "You don't get to sit there like you belong." Belong. The word hung in the air. Daniel blinked once, slow. Blood slid into his left eye. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, leaving a dark smear across his cheek. His breathing was controlled, measured. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Years of discipline lived in that breath, even now. He did not look like a man who owned anything in this cabin. He wore worn sneakers, a charcoal hoodie with soft creases at the elbows, faded jeans, no watch, no ring, no visible armor. Just a tall black man, sitting quietly in the most expensive seat on the plane, bleeding. Laura Bennett stood frozen 2 rows back, one hand hovering near her chest, the other gripping the edge of a service cart like it might tip over. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted between Richard's suit, the platinum status tag dangling from his carry-on, and Daniel's size. His skin. The blood. "Oh my God," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her training screamed order, procedure, escalation. Her instincts screamed something else. Choose the path of least resistance. Choose the loud one, the important one. A man in 3F leaned forward, eyes bright. "Did you see that?" he said, not quietly. "That guy just snapped." A woman near the window clutched her pearls, lips pressed thin. "They should remove him," she said, gaze fixed on Daniel, not the man still standing over him. "This is first class." Daniel heard all of it. The words, the judgment, the invisible verdict forming in real time. He felt the cabin tilt against him, not physically, but morally. The way rooms sometimes do when a line is crossed and everyone pretends it isn't there. Richard took a step closer, invading what little space remained. The smell of expensive cologne and old whiskey wrapped around Daniel's face. Richard pointed at the seat, jabbing the air. "That's my seat. I don't care what your ticket says. I always sit there. Always. You think that's an accident?" Daniel finally looked up. His right eye was clear, dark, focused. It locked onto Richard with a steadiness that did not match the blood on his face. For a brief second, Richard hesitated. Something in that gaze unsettled him. Not fear, not confusion. Assessment. "I paid for this seat," Daniel said quietly. His voice was low, even. It carried without effort. "You're in 2A." The calm made it worse. Richard laughed, sharp and humorless. "Listen to him. You hear that?" He turned, playing to the audience. "This guy thinks he's my equal." He leaned back in, voice dropping. You should have moved when they asked you. Now look at you. Laura flinched. Mr. Collins, she said, forcing her voice to work. Please, let's all calm down. Sir, she added, turning to Daniel, her tone shifting. Maybe it would be easier if you just took another seat for now. We can sort this out once we're airborne. Easier? For whom? Daniel felt a pulse behind his eye, a deep throb. He swallowed, steadying himself. He did not raise his voice. I'm not moving. The cabin reacted like a living thing, a ripple of murmurs, discomfort, annoyance. The unspoken thought spreading from row to row. Why is he making this difficult? Richard's jaw tightened. You hear that? He barked. He's being aggressive. Aggressive. The word landed heavy. Daniel's fingers curled once, then relaxed. He thought of the cameras, the headlines that would write themselves if he stood up too fast, if his hands closed into fists. He stayed seated. I haven't touched you, Daniel said. You touched me. That's not how it looked, someone said from behind. A man in a polo shirt, eyes glued to his phone screen, already framing the narrative. Laura took a step back, heart pounding. She could feel control slipping. She hated that it made her afraid. Hated that fear had a direction. She pressed the call button on the wall, hard. Captain, she said into the interphone, voice thin. We have a situation in first class. Richard smiled, a small, satisfied curve of the mouth. He straightened his jacket, adjusting the cuffs like he was resetting the world back into its proper order. Good, he said, because I don't feel safe. Daniel almost laughed. Almost. He leaned his head back against the seat, careful not to smear more blood on the leather. The window beside him reflected a fractured image of his face. Split, red, calm. He watched his own breath fog the glass for a second, then fade. No one in this cabin knew who he was. They didn't know the seat beneath him existed because of a signature he'd put down 3 days ago. They didn't know the plane, humming quietly outside the window, was leased through a holding company that answered to him. They didn't know the people scrambling in offices across the ocean, waiting for a call that had not yet come. All they saw was a hoodie in the wrong place. The captain's voice crackled faintly through the cabin speakers, distorted and distant. First class, report. Laura opened her mouth to speak. Richard beat her to it. There's a passenger refusing to comply, he said loudly, eyes never leaving Daniel. He got physical. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the pain was sharper, the world tighter, like the air before a storm breaks. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A silent reminder, a choice. He did not reach for it. Not yet. Outside the plane, rain streaked down the terminal windows, blurring the lights into long white lines. Inside, the cabin held its breath. The cameras kept rolling. The judgment hardened. And somewhere between the blood on the seat and the lie forming in the air, something irreversible began to move. No one noticed when Daniel Brooks slipped his phone out of his pocket, because everyone was too busy watching Richard Collins perform. Richard had turned toward the cabin like a man stepping onto a stage, his shoulders squared. His voice rose and fell with practiced indignation. He knew this rhythm. He had used it in boardrooms, at hotel desks, in restaurants that dared to seat him near a kitchen door. The rhythm that said, power lives in volume. Power lives in certainty. This is unacceptable, Richard said, palms open now, the picture of reason. I board a plane I fly every month. I find my seat taken. I politely ask for it back, and suddenly I'm the bad guy. He shook his head slowly, as if disappointed by the world. I didn't even raise my voice until he got confrontational. Daniel watched him through his good eye. He catalogued the details the way he always did when things mattered. The way Richard avoided looking at his knuckles. The way he angled his body so the blood on Daniel's hoodie stayed just out of sight for the people filming. The way Laura Bennett stood half a step behind Richard, unconsciously aligning herself with him. Laura's chest felt tight. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She told herself she was managing a crisis, that she was doing what she had been trained to do. De-escalate. Protect the flight. Protect the brand. But every time she looked at Daniel, sitting there quietly with blood drying on his face, something twisted uncomfortably in her stomach. "Sir," she said, addressing him without using his name, because she had never bothered to learn it. "I need you to stand up so we can sort this out in the aisle." Daniel did not move. He kept his gaze level. "I'm injured," he said. "I'd prefer to stay seated." That word again. Prefer. Calm. Reasonable. It irritated Richard more than any shout could have. "You hear that?" Richard said, turning again. "He's refusing instructions." "That's a federal issue, isn't it?" He looked at Laura, eyebrows raised, inviting her to agree. Laura hesitated. She felt the eyes of the cabin on her now, judging, expectant. She thought of her supervisor's voice during training videos. High-value passengers drive revenue. High-value passengers complain. High-value passengers escalate. "I need you to cooperate," she said to Daniel, her tone firmer, colder. "Right now." Daniel inhaled slowly. He could feel the cut above his eye swelling, tightening the skin. He pressed his tongue to the inside of his cheek, grounding himself. The old instinct rose, familiar and dangerous. Correct them. Name the bias. Demand accountability. He pushed it down. Not yet. Around them, the cabin hummed with a low, restless energy. A man 2 rows back whispered, "Why doesn't he just move?" Another replied, "Because people like that always want to make a point." A woman near the aisle leaned toward her husband, voice sharp. "I don't feel safe with him here." Daniel had that too. He always did. The way fear slid so easily onto a body that looked like his. The way no one asked if he felt safe. His phone vibrated again. He glanced down, shielding the screen with his palm. No missed calls, no alerts. Just a reminder he had set himself days ago. Audit complete. Report findings. He almost smiled. Richard took another step forward. He was too close now. Daniel could see the fine lines around his eyes, the faint tremor in his hand. "You think sitting there makes you something," Richard said quietly, venom creeping into his voice. "It doesn't. You're just another guy who got lucky." Daniel looked up at him. "You should step back." There it was. The shift. Not loud, not threatening, but something in Daniel's tone changed. A steel edge under the calm. A line drawn. Richard felt it, even if he didn't understand it. His face flushed deeper. "Or what?" he snapped. The cabin leaned in. Before Daniel could answer, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out, tall and grey-haired, his expression already set in a mask of professional annoyance. "What's going on up here?" he asked. Laura exhaled in relief. "Captain, we have a passenger dispute. Mr. Collins is claiming his seat was taken, and this gentleman is refusing to relocate." Refusing? Interesting choice. The captain's eyes moved to Daniel. Took him in. The hoodie, the blood, the stillness. He frowned. "Sir, are you hurt?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "I was struck." Richard scoffed. "That's exaggerated." The captain's jaw tightened. He looked back and forth between them, weighing something. He had seen this kind of scene before. He knew how these stories usually ended. "I need everyone to calm down," he said. "We're not going anywhere until this is resolved." A murmur of frustration rippled through the cabin. Phones dipped, then rose again. Someone muttered about connections. Another cursed under their breath. "Captain," Richard said, voice smooth now, with respect. "This shouldn't delay the flight. I'm happy to file a report once he's removed from my seat." Removed. Just like that. Daniel felt the eyes again, waiting to see if he would explode, waiting to see if the stereotype would perform on cue. Instead, he reached up and pressed the call button again, deliberately this time. He met the captain's gaze. "Before you make any decisions," he said, "I'd like medical assistance and law enforcement present." The captain paused. "Law enforcement?" "Yes," Daniel said. "I was assaulted." Richard laughed, loud and incredulous. "You can't be serious." Daniel's phone buzzed a third time. This time, he answered. He didn't raise it to his ear. He didn't turn away. He simply said, "Michael, it's me." The name meant nothing to the cabin. Just another name, another call. "Yes," a voice crackled faintly through the speaker, distorted by the connection, but alert. "Are you on the plane?" Daniel looked straight ahead, at Richard, at Laura, at the captain. "I am, and we have a problem." The cabin noise seemed to dim, like someone had turned down a dial. A few people frowned, sensing a shift they couldn't quite name. Richard opened his mouth to interrupt. Daniel lifted one finger. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just enough. "I've been struck by a passenger," Daniel continued. "Crew response has been inadequate. I need this aircraft held at the gate." Laura felt her stomach drop. She leaned closer to the captain, whispering urgently, "Sir, we can handle this internally." On the other end of the line, Michael Harris went very quiet. "Are you safe?" he asked. Daniel glanced at the blood on his sleeve. "I will be." Richard's smile faltered. He looked from Daniel to the phone, then back again. "Who are you calling?" he demanded. Daniel did not answer him. Not yet. Outside the plane, the rain intensified, drumming against the fuselage like impatient fingers. Inside, something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged. The captain cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Daniel, more cautiously now, "we're still at the gate. I can request airport police." "Yes," Daniel said. "Please do." Laura stared at him, a flicker of fear breaking through her composure. She realized, too late, that she had never actually checked his credentials beyond a boarding pass, that she had made assumptions, that assumptions had momentum. Richard scoffed again, but there was less confidence in it this time. "This is ridiculous," he said, louder than necessary. "You're grounding a flight because this guy wants attention." Daniel finally turned his head fully toward him. Their eyes met. "No," he said softly. "This is happening because you crossed a line." The captain nodded slowly, decision made. He turned toward the cockpit. "Contact ground," he ordered. "Tell them to stand by." As he disappeared behind the door, the cabin erupted into overlapping voices. Complaints, speculation, excitement, fear. Richard took a step back, suddenly unsure where to stand. Laura felt her hands shake. Daniel sat very still, phone warm in his palm, blood drying on his skin. The reveal had not come yet. But the door was open. The engines wound down with a long, mechanical sigh, a sound that felt wrong at this moment, like a heartbeat slowing when adrenaline was still pumping through the body. The plane settled into an uneasy quiet. The usual pre-taxi whine faded. A few passengers looked up, confused, then annoyed. Phones came out again. Someone near the aisle cursed under their breath. "We're stopping now." Daniel Brooks noticed all of it. He noticed how the light through the window shifted when the jet bridge began creeping back toward the aircraft. He noticed the way Richard Collins stiffened when he heard the change in pitch from the engines, how his confidence cracked just enough to let panic breathe. That's not normal, Richard said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. Why are we shutting down? Laura Bennett swallowed hard. Her headset buzzed softly with overlapping voices from operations and the cockpit. She nodded mechanically, eyes unfocused. We've been instructed to hold position, she said. Her voice sounded thinner than she intended. Just a precaution. A precaution. That word tasted bitter in her mouth. Daniel sat back, careful not to lean on the cut above his eye. The blood had darkened, tacky now against his skin. He could feel his pulse in his temple, slow and heavy. He stayed still. Stillness had always unnerved people more than anger. The cabin door opened. Cold air rushed in first, followed by the sound of boots on metal. 2 Port Authority police officers stepped onto the plane, broad-shouldered, faces set in professional neutrality. Behind them, a 3rd officer scanned the cabin, already reading the room. The reaction was immediate. Phones rose higher, whispers sharpened. "Thank God," Richard said loudly, relief flooding his voice. He stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Officers, I'm glad you're here. I was just assaulted." Daniel watched the lie form in real time. Smooth, confident, untouched by doubt. The taller officer, Sergeant Miller, held up a hand. "Sir, we'll get to you. Everyone stay seated." Richard ignored the instruction. He gestured toward Daniel with an open palm, like a lawyer presenting evidence. He refused to move from my seat, became aggressive, and attacked me when I tried to de-escalate. De-escalate. The audacity of it made a few passengers nod along. "That's not what happened," someone said quietly from the back, but the voice was swallowed by the moment. Sergeant Miller turned his attention to Daniel. His eyes flicked to the blood, then to Daniel's hands, open, resting on his thighs, not shaking. "Sir," Miller said, measured, "can you tell me what happened?" Daniel lifted his gaze slowly. He met the officer's eyes without challenge, without submission. "I was seated in my assigned seat," he said. "Mr. Collins demanded I move. When I refused, he struck me." Richard scoffed. "That's ridiculous." The 2nd officer, younger, glanced between them. His eyes lingered on Daniel's size, his hoodie, the stain of blood. Old instincts surfaced, the ones no training fully erased. Laura cleared her throat, heart pounding. "I didn't see the first strike," she said quickly, choosing her words carefully. "There was a dispute, voices were raised, and then things escalated." Escalated. A convenient blur. Sergeant Miller nodded slowly. "Any witnesses?" Hands hesitated. Then one man, halfway down the cabin, raised his phone. "I was recording," he said. "I got most of it." Richard's face tightened. "That video doesn't show context," he snapped. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second. The pain pulsed again, sharp. He breathed through it. The 3rd officer, a woman with tired eyes and a clipped tone, stepped closer to Daniel. "Sir, do you need medical attention?" "Yes," Daniel said, "and I'd like to press charges." The words landed like a dropped tray. Press charges. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. Richard laughed again, louder this time, brittle at the edges. "Charges? You're kidding. For a misunderstanding?" Daniel didn't look at him. He looked at the officer. "I was assaulted." Silence pressed in, thick and uncomfortable. Sergeant Miller turned to Richard. "Sir, I need you to step back to your seat." Richard hesitated, just a beat too long. Then he complied, smoothing his jacket as he retreated, eyes darting. He leaned toward Laura as he passed. "This is getting out of hand," he whispered. "You need to fix this." Laura felt something close to nausea. Fix this? She had tried, or at least she had thought she had. The officers conferred quietly near the galley. Daniel could hear fragments, conflicting statements, injury present, Witness video. Protocol. His phone vibrated again in his hand. He glanced down. A single message from Michael Harris. Understood. Stand by. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Not from fear. From resolve. Sergeant Miller returned, posture more formal now. We're going to need identification from both of you, he said. Richard was ready. He produced his license with a flourish, along with a platinum frequent flyer card, holding it just a second longer than necessary. I travel constantly, he said, as if that explained everything. Daniel reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately. He pulled out his wallet. Simple. Black. No logo. He handed over his driver's license first. Miller glanced at it. Daniel Brooks, age 42. Then Daniel handed over a second card. The card was heavy, matte black. No numbers, no slogan. Just a discreet emblem in silver. Sergeant Miller's eyes paused, just for a fraction of a second, then widened, almost imperceptibly. The younger officer leaned in, curious. The woman officer straightened. Miller looked up at Daniel again. Really looked this time. His tone shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Mr. Brooks, he said, are you requesting an ambulance? Yes, Daniel replied, but not until this is documented properly. Richard noticed the change. His smile faltered. What is that? He demanded, nodding toward the card. Some kind of fake ID? Miller ignored him. He handed Daniel's license back with care. Understood, sir. Sir. The word hit Richard like a slap. What's going on? Richard said, voice sharp. Why are you calling him sir? The cabin leaned forward as one. Even Laura felt it, the air shifting, reality bending around something she couldn't see yet. Miller turned to his team. Cuff him. Richard blinked. Once. Twice. What? The younger officer stepped toward him. Sir, please turn around. This is insane, Richard barked, backing up a step. You've got the wrong guy. Turn around, the officer repeated, firmer now. Richard's face drained of color. He looked around, searching for allies, for recognition, for the old rules to reassert themselves. Phones were still raised. Faces were no longer sympathetic. As the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, a low murmur swept the cabin. You're making a mistake, Richard hissed, twisting to look at Daniel. You don't know who I am. Daniel met his gaze calmly. I do, he said. That's the problem. Laura's knees felt weak. She gripped the back of a seat to steady herself. Her mind raced backward, replaying every decision, every assumption. She saw herself at the door, scanning Daniel's boarding pass with suspicion. She felt the weight of it now. The officers began escorting Richard down the aisle. He protested loudly, his voice cracking, rage curdling into fear. This isn't over, he shouted. I'll sue everyone. Daniel watched him go, expression unreadable. The cabin was silent again, but it was a different silence now. Heavier, charged, expectant. Sergeant Miller turned back to Daniel. Paramedics are on the way, he said. And, sir, we'll need to take a full statement. Daniel nodded once. Of course. His phone buzzed again. He didn't look at it this time. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, systems were already moving. Decisions were being made. Lines were being drawn. The reveal was close now. The jet bridge locked into place with a heavy metallic thud that echoed through the cabin like a verdict being sealed. Paramedics boarded first, their movements efficient, faces unreadable. One knelt beside Daniel Brooks, gloved hands hovering for a brief second before gently tilting his chin toward the light. Can you tell me where it hurts? The medic asked. Head. Ribs, Daniel said. His voice was steady, but the effort showed now. Sweat beaded along his hairline. The adrenaline was thinning, leaving pain behind like a tide pulling back. The medic nodded, shining a penlight into Daniel's eye. Any dizziness? Yes. Laura Bennett watched from a few steps away, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She'd gone very still. The noise of the cabin had faded into a dull roar in her ears, like she was underwater. Every few seconds her eyes flicked to Daniel's face, then away again, as if looking too long might make something undeniable. Sergeant Miller stood off to the side, radio pressed to his shoulder, voice low. We have one in custody, male, mid-40s. Victim transported shortly. Yes, still at the gate. He listened, then straightened. Understood. A murmur rippled through the cabin as passengers processed what they were seeing. The confident man in the suit was gone, dragged away in cuffs. The quiet man in the hoodie was now surrounded by professionals moving carefully, respectfully. The story had flipped, and no one wanted to admit how quickly they had chosen the wrong side. A woman in the second row leaned toward her husband, whispering, "Who is he?" Her husband shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he said, eyes fixed on Daniel. "But I don't think we're supposed to know." The paramedics lifted Daniel onto a stretcher. As they raised him, a sharp pain shot through his side. He exhaled through his teeth, refusing to make a sound. His eyes found Laura's as they passed her. Not angry, not accusatory, just tired. Laura flinched as if struck. "Sir," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the hush. "Mr. Brooks," she swallowed. I'm sorry." Daniel studied her face for a long second. He saw the fear there now, real fear, and something else beneath it. Shame. He nodded once. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just acknowledgement. "Learn from it," he said quietly. The words landed harder than any insult could have. As Daniel was wheeled toward the door, phones followed him like a procession of small blinking eyes. A young man near the aisle whispered, "That's him. That's the guy." His voice held awe now, not mockery. Outside the plane, the terminal buzzed with confusion. Departure boards flickered. One by one, flights associated with Airlux began to change status. Delayed, held, pending. The ripple spread faster than anyone could track. An operations manager in a dark blazer jogged up the jet bridge, tablet clutched to her chest. Her face was pale. She stopped short when she saw Daniel being transferred to a wheelchair. "Mr. Brooks," she said, breathless. "I'm Karen Lewis, station director." Daniel looked up at her, eyes heavy but sharp. "Status," he said. Karen hesitated, then answered honestly. "All departures are on hold. We've received instructions from headquarters." Daniel nodded. "Good." Karen swallowed. "Sir, the cost." Daniel lifted a hand. She stopped talking. The terminal beyond them was a sea of stalled motion. Passengers stood in clusters, staring at screens. Agents fielded shouted questions they couldn't answer. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, a businessman yelled into his phone. A travel blogger near a charging station whispered urgently into a camera. "Guys, this is insane. I just watched a man get arrested in first class, and now the entire airline is frozen." The video count climbed. An ambulance waited at the curb, lights off but engine running. As paramedics loaded Daniel inside, his phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. "Yes," he said. Michael Harris's voice came through, tight and controlled. "It's done. Protocol 0 is live." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Good. Are you sure about this?" Michael asked. "The board is already panicking. We're talking millions per hour." Daniel leaned his head back against the seat. The siren wailed softly as the ambulance pulled away. "I'm aware," he said. "That's why we're doing it." The city slid past the window in blurred streaks of grey and white. Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle fully now. The pain, the exhaustion, the consequence. He welcomed it. This was the cost of leverage. At the airport gate, Laura stood alone now. Her supervisor had arrived, eyes wide, voice sharp. "What did you do?" he hissed. Laura didn't answer. She stared at the empty seat at 1A, the faint smear of blood still visible against the leather. It looked smaller now, ordinary. She understood, suddenly, that the seat had never been the point. In a conference room overlooking the tarmac, executives gathered around a table littered with phones and half-opened laptops. Voices overlapped. "We need a statement. We need to restart operations. We need to know who approved this." Karen Lewis stood at the head of the table, hands braced on the surface. "He did," she said. "Daniel Brooks." A beat of silence. One man laughed nervously. "The guy from the plane?" Karen nodded. "The owner." The word hit the room like a shockwave. Someone swore under their breath. Another sank into a chair. Outside, news alerts began to hit phones across the terminal. Airline halts operations following onboard assault. Social media ignited. Clips replayed. Narratives shifted in real time. In the ambulance, Daniel watched it unfold on his screen without emotion. He saw himself, bloodied, calm. He saw Richard's face contorted with rage, then fear. He saw Laura, standing frozen, caught between two worlds. He turned the phone off. The hospital lights were harsh, unforgiving. Doctors moved around him, asking questions, shining lights, pressing gently. 12 stitches, concussion, bruised ribs. Nothing fatal. Enough to remember. As they worked, Daniel's mind moved elsewhere. To the boardroom he would enter soon. To the conversations that would be uncomfortable, necessary. To the policies that existed only on paper until someone enforced them with real power. A nurse finished taping the bandage over his brow. "You're lucky," she said softly. Daniel met her eyes. "I know." Outside the room, reporters gathered, voices rising. Names were being spoken now. His name. Titles attached. Context finally catching up. Daniel sat back, breathing evenly, the weight of the day settling into his bones. He had not planned to reveal himself this way. He had not planned to bleed. But sometimes, systems only listen when they are forced to stop. And tonight, everything had stopped. Richard Collins stared at the beige wall of the interview room and tried to slow his breathing, but his chest refused to listen. The room smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. A metal table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs. No windows. The cuffs bit into his wrists every time he shifted. A sharp reminder that this was not a misunderstanding anymore. This was real. This was happening. "This is procedural," he muttered, to no one in particular. "They'll figure it out." Across the table, Sergeant Miller flipped through a thin folder without looking at him. The sound of paper sliding was loud in the small space. Deliberate, unrushed. "You've been advised of your rights," Miller said calmly. "We're just getting your statement." Richard leaned forward as much as the cuffs allowed. "Good, because I want to be very clear. I was provoked. That man refused crew instructions. He was aggressive." Miller finally looked up. His eyes were flat. "The man you assaulted was seated. You approached him." Richard scoffed. He didn't belong there. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Miller's pen paused. Just for a second. Then he wrote something down. In another building across town, Daniel Brooks lay propped up in a hospital bed, the steady beep of a monitor keeping time with his breathing. The room was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something breaks, and everyone waits to see what falls next. Michael Harris stood near the window, Phone pressed to his ear, shoulders tight. "No," he said, voice clipped. "We are not restarting operations tonight." He listened, jaw set. "Because the order stands." He ended the call and turned back to Daniel. "They're furious." Daniel didn't look up from the ceiling. "They'll survive." Michael hesitated. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting first thing in the morning." Daniel nodded once. "Schedule it." "And the press?" Michael asked. "They're camped outside." Daniel turned his head slightly. The bandage tugged at his skin. "They can wait." On a muted television in the corner, a news anchor spoke with urgent intensity. "An unprecedented shutdown of Airline International following an on-board assault has sent shockwaves through the aviation industry tonight." The image on screen froze on a still frame of Daniel being wheeled through the terminal, blood visible, expression unreadable. Michael glanced at the screen, then back at Daniel. "You're trending everywhere." Daniel closed his eyes. "That's not why we did this." Michael nodded. He knew that, but the world didn't. Back at the airport, Laura Bennett sat alone in a small office, hands folded in her lap, staring at a laminated safety chart on the wall. Her supervisor paced in front of her, agitation radiating off him. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded. Laura's voice was barely audible. "I followed protocol." He stopped pacing. "No, you followed fear." She flinched. "You saw a loud man in a suit and a quiet man in a hoodie," he continued. "And you decided which one mattered." He exhaled sharply. "Corporate is reviewing everything. Your reports, your body cam footage, your training history." Laura swallowed. "Am I fired?" He didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. In the holding area of the precinct, Richard paced as much as the cuffs allowed, anger giving way to something colder. Fear. He had called his lawyer 3 times, straight to voicemail. He had left messages, sharp ones, demanding ones. "Someone will fix this," he muttered. "They always do." The door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped in, carrying a tablet. Not his lawyer. Not the face he wanted to see. "Mr. Collins," the man said. "I'm here on behalf of Airline International." Relief surged. "Finally," Richard said. "This has gone far enough." The man didn't sit. "Your corporate travel privileges have been suspended, effective immediately." Richard blinked. "What?" "Your company's logistics contract is under review," the man continued, voice neutral. "Pending further investigation." "That's not possible," Richard snapped. "I close deals with your airline all the time." The man looked at him evenly. "Not anymore." Richard laughed, high and brittle. "You can't just do that." The man tapped his tablet, then turned the screen toward him. A news alert filled it. "Owner of Aerolux assaulted onboard aircraft." Owner. Richard felt the word land in his gut like a dropped weight. "Owner," he whispered. "Yes," the man said. "Daniel Brooks." The room tilted. Richard grabbed the edge of the table, knuckles white. "No," he said. "That's not real." He was wearing a hoodie. The man's expression didn't change. "He owns the airline." Silence swallowed the room. In the hospital, Daniel sat up slowly, ignoring the ache in his ribs. A nurse tried to protest, but he waved her off gently. He picked up his phone and scrolled through messages he hadn't opened yet. Board members, advisors, old contacts resurfacing with new urgency. One message stood out, from an unknown number. "I saw what happened. Thank you for not letting it slide." Daniel stared at it for a long moment, then locked the screen. Michael returned, phone buzzing non-stop. "We've got a situation," he said. "The market opens in a few hours,
Analysts are already speculating. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. Let them. You're about to be painted as reckless, Michael warned. Emotional. Daniel met his gaze. I was assaulted on my own plane. Michael nodded slowly. I know. At dawn, the city woke to chaos. Flights canceled, terminals clogged. Travelers angry, confused, glued to their phones. And everywhere the same image. A man in a hoodie, bloodied but composed, walking past flashing cameras while an airline ground to a halt behind him.
In a conference room overlooking Manhattan, the Aerolux board assembled, tension thick as fog. Grey suits, tight smiles, voices low. This is a disaster, one man said. We're bleeding money. Another snapped. He can't just shut down operations because of a personal incident. The door opened. Daniel Brooks walked in. The room fell silent. He moved carefully, but he moved with purpose. The bandage above his eye was stark against his skin. The scar would remain, a reminder. He didn't sit right away. He looked at each of them in turn. You're right, he said. This isn't about a seat. No one spoke. This is about what happens when power goes unchecked, Daniel continued. When entitlement becomes policy. When silence becomes complicity. A man at the far end cleared his throat. Daniel, with respect, this response... Daniel raised a hand. The room froze. With respect, he said evenly. I was assaulted because someone decided I didn't belong, and the room didn't breathe until Daniel Brooks sat down. Leather chairs creaked softly as the board shifted, a reflexive adjustment to power settling into its proper place. Morning light spilled across the table, catching the edges of glass water pitchers and untouched folders. Outside, Manhattan moved as if nothing had happened. Inside, everything had. Before we begin, Daniel said, voice low, controlled. Understand this. I didn't come here to be defended. I came here to be understood. No one interrupted him. No one dared. A man with silver hair and a practiced scowl leaned forward. Daniel, shutting down the entire operation created a cascade we're still measuring. Regulators are calling. Partners are calling. This can't become precedent. Daniel met his eyes without flinching. It already is. A murmur rippled around the table. Someone scribbled notes that would never be read again. You're talking about optics, Daniel continued. I'm talking about culture. Last night exposed what we've been pretending not to see. A hierarchy built on fear. A reflex that favors volume over truth. A system that decided a man in a suit mattered more than a man who paid for his seat. He paused, letting the words settle. The bandage above his eye pulled slightly as his brow tightened. Respectfully, another board member said, voice measured. This could have been handled quietly, internally. Daniel turned to him. Quietly is how it happened. Silence answered him back. Across town, in a fluorescent hallway that smelled faintly of bleach, Richard Collins sat slumped on a hard bench, wrists free now, but spirit stripped bare. He stared at the floor, replaying the moment the word owner had been spoken, over and over. Each time it landed heavier. His phone buzzed. One notification. Contract terminated. Then another. Leave of absence effective immediately. Then nothing. He pressed his palms to his face, breathing fast, shallow. The world he had built on assumptions was collapsing, brick by brick, and there was nothing he could buy to stop it. Back in the boardroom, Daniel slid a single document across the table. It was thin. No glossy cover, no branding. This is effective immediately, he said. We're calling it the Dignity Protocol. A woman at the far end picked it up, eyes scanning. Her lips parted slightly. Lifetime bans for abusive conduct, she read. No exceptions, regardless of status. Yes, Daniel said. And crew authority protections, another added, reading faster now. You're removing penalties for reporting high-value passengers. I'm removing fear, Daniel replied. If a crew member enforces this policy in good faith, they're protected. Period. A beat passed, then another. You'll lose some customers, the silver-haired man said. Daniel nodded. Good. That landed harder than anything else he'd said. At the airport, Laura Bennett stood in an empty break room, uniform folded neatly in her locker. Her phone buzzed once. A short message from HR. Meeting required. Effective immediately. She closed her eyes, inhaled, then opened them again. In the reflection of the metal locker door, she barely recognized herself. She thought of Daniel's eyes as he passed her. Not angry, just tired. She understood now that apologies meant nothing without change. Outside, a crowd gathered behind barricades. Cameras pointed toward the terminal entrance. A reporter's voice cut through the air. Daniel Brooks, do you have a statement? He stepped forward, flanked by Michael Harris and two officers who kept a respectful distance. The noise swelled. Daniel raised a hand. It quieted, slowly, like a tide pulling back. This isn't about revenge, he said. His voice carried without effort. It's about standards. For too long, we've confused inconvenience with injustice. Last night, that confusion ended. A reporter shouted, "Are you punishing millions of travelers for one incident?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. No, I'm protecting them. The crowd buzzed. Someone clapped, then another. At the precinct, Sergeant Miller watched Richard sign a stack of papers with a shaking hand. You'll be arraigned, he said evenly. Charges include aggravated assault and interference with flight crew. Richard didn't look up. I want my lawyer. You'll get one, Miller replied. Just not the one you expect. In the hospital, a nurse removed Daniel's IV with practiced ease. You should take it easy, she said. Daniel smiled faintly. I don't know how. She smiled back, softer. I figured. By midday, the stock ticker told a story no one had predicted. After an initial dip, Aerolux began to climb. Analysts scrambled to explain it. Commentators argued. Social media took sides. A clip of Daniel's statement looped endlessly. A still image of him, bloodied but composed, became a symbol far larger than the man himself. In the boardroom, the final objections dissolved under the weight of numbers and narrative. The silver-haired man leaned back, exhaling. The public's with you, he admitted. For now. Daniel nodded. Then let's earn it. Across the city, Richard Collins was led down a corridor toward a holding cell, the echo of his footsteps loud and hollow. He thought of the seat, of the hoodie, of the certainty he had felt. It all seemed absurd now. Back at headquarters, Daniel stood alone for a moment, looking out at the skyline. The city reflected in the glass, fractured, imperfect, alive. He touched the edge of the bandage, winced slightly, then lowered his hand. Power, he knew, was not in the punch. It was in the pause afterward. The decision to stop everything and ask what mattered. Behind him, the boardroom door closed softly. Ahead of him, the work had just begun. The courtroom smelled like old wood and quiet judgment. Daniel Brooks sat in the front row, hands folded loosely in his lap, posture straight despite the dull ache that still lived in his ribs. The scar above his eye was healing now, a thin, pale line cutting through his brow like punctuation. He didn't hide it. He didn't soften it. Cameras clicked when he entered, then stopped when he sat. Something about his stillness made people lower their lenses. Across the aisle, Richard Collins looked smaller than he had on the plane. The suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled jacket that didn't quite fit. His hair, once slicked back with care, lay flat and lifeless. He kept rubbing his hands together, as if trying to wash something off that wouldn't come loose. When he glanced at Daniel, it was quick, instinctive, then away again. There was no anger left there, only calculation and fear. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Wood scraped against stone. The room settled. The prosecutor stood, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. She spoke of facts, of timelines, of a punch thrown without provocation, of blood on leather seats, of a plane full of witnesses. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When she showed the video, the room went still. The angle was imperfect, shaky, but the moment was clear. Richard leaning in, Daniel seated. The sudden swing, the impact. A soft sound, almost worse than a loud one. Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. Someone else whispered, "Jesus." Richard's attorney stood next. He spoke of stress, of alcohol, of misunderstanding, of a moment that spiraled. He gestured toward Richard, as if presenting a cautionary tale. "My client has already lost everything," he said. "Isn't that punishment enough?" The judge's gaze flicked briefly toward Daniel, then back. Neutral, professional, unmoved. Daniel was called to the stand. He walked slowly, aware of every eye, every whisper. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, sat. The wood was hard beneath him. He welcomed it, grounding. The prosecutor asked him to describe what happened. Daniel did not dramatize. He did not editorialize. He spoke plainly. "I was seated. He demanded I move. I refused. He struck me." "Did you provoke him?" she asked. "No." "Did you threaten him?" "No." "Did you strike him back?" "No." The defense attorney stood. He tried to poke holes, tried to suggest tone, body language, presence. "You're a large man, Mr. Brooks," he said. "Could that have been intimidating?" Daniel met his eyes calmly. "Existing isn't a threat." A murmur rippled through the gallery before the judge silenced it with a glance. Outside the courtroom, the world waited. Reporters lined the steps. Commentators filled airtime. Everyone wanted a simple ending, a villain punished, a hero crowned. Daniel knew better. Real change was rarely neat. The verdict came quickly. Guilty. The word landed with a dull finality. Richard's shoulders slumped. His attorney closed his eyes. In the gallery, someone exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for weeks. Sentencing followed. The judge spoke without flourish. She spoke of accountability, of public safety, of the danger of entitlement unchecked. She spoke of consequences. Richard was led away, head down, the sound of cuffs echoing once more. This time, no one filmed. Daniel watched him go. He felt no triumph, only a quiet, heavy resolve. That afternoon, Daniel returned to headquarters. The building hummed with activity, a different energy now. People stood straighter. Conversations paused when he passed, not out of fear, but awareness. He had changed something. They all felt it. In a training room on the 15th floor, new hires sat in neat rows. On the screen behind them, the words "Dignity Protocol" glowed in simple black text. A facilitator spoke about authority and responsibility, about intervention, about respect as a non-negotiable standard. Daniel stood at the back, unseen, listening. One trainee raised a hand. "What if the passenger is important?" she asked. The facilitator didn't hesitate. "Then it's more important we do this right." Daniel nodded to himself. Later, in a quiet office, Laura Bennett sat across from an HR representative. Her uniform was gone. Her hands were steady now, though her eyes were tired. "I failed," she said. "I see that." The representative studied her. "Do you understand why?" Laura swallowed. "Because I chose comfort over courage." The door opened softly. Daniel stepped in. Laura froze, then stood quickly. "Mr. Brooks, Daniel raised a hand. "Sit." She did. "I didn't come to punish you," he said. "I came to see if you learned." She met his eyes. "I did." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That's the beginning." He left without another word. Weeks passed. Flights resumed. Systems stabilized. The headlines faded, replaced by new scandals, new distractions. But something underneath had shifted. Complaints dropped. Staff turnover slowed. Passengers noticed the difference, even if they couldn't name it. One evening, Daniel boarded another flight. Same route, same airline. He wore the same hoodie. This time, the boarding agent smiled without hesitation. "Welcome back, Mr. Brooks." He nodded, returned the smile, and walked on. As he settled into his seat, a young man across the aisle leaned over. "Sir," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you." Daniel looked at him. "For what?" "For making it safer," the man said. "For all of us." Daniel sat back as the plane pushed away from the gate. The engines roared to life, strong and steady. Outside the window, the city lights blurred into motion. He closed his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from something like peace. The world had not been fixed, but it had been corrected. The first email arrived at 6:12 in the morning, marked urgent, sent from a regional director Daniel barely knew. By 7, there were dozens more. Subject lines blurred together as Daniel scrolled through them at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling untouched beside his phone. Reports, incident summaries, apologies dressed up as explanations. Each message carried the same subtext. "We didn't think it would be us." He read them all anyway. Outside his apartment, the city was waking slowly. Delivery trucks groaned. A siren wailed and faded. Somewhere below, a dog barked at nothing. Ordinary sounds, anchoring him while he moved through something larger than himself. Michael Harris called at 7:40. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. Daniel leaned against the counter, eyes still on his screen. "Which one?" "3 so far," Michael replied. "Denver, Dallas, San Diego. Different crews, same pattern. Passenger complaints that would have been brushed off last month are now being documented, escalated, and in one case, a crew member stopped boarding and removed a platinum flyer." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Good." There was a pause on the line. "You realize that's going to cost us?" "Yes," Daniel said. "And it's going to save us more." Michael exhaled. "The unions are watching. So are the regulators. Everyone's trying to figure out if this is a moment or a movement." Daniel opened one of the emails again, rereading a line he'd underlined mentally the first time. Crew member reported feeling empowered to act without fear of retaliation. "That's the point," he said. "Moments fade. Systems don't." Across the city, in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of takeout and old carpet, Laura Bennett sat at a small table with her laptop open and her resume half rewritten. She stared at the screen, fingers hovering, unsure what to type next. She had slept badly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood, the seat, Daniel's face as he passed her. Not angry, worse, disappointed. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Laura Bennett," she said finally. Ms. Bennett, this is Karen Lewis from Aerolux, the voice on the other end said. Do you have a moment? Laura's stomach dropped. Yes? There was a brief pause. We're launching a new internal training division, Karen continued. Peer-led, accountability-focused. We need people who understand what went wrong because they lived it. Laura swallowed hard. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance, Karen said. It won't be comfortable. Laura looked around her apartment. The silence, the weight of the past weeks. Neither was losing everything, she said. When do I start? By mid-morning, Daniel was in his office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, moving through meetings like a surgeon. Each conversation cut cleanly to the bone. Marketing wanted to soften the language. Daniel refused. Legal wanted more disclaimers. Daniel declined. Finance wanted a timeline for normalcy. Daniel asked them to redefine the word. At 11, a junior analyst knocked on his door, eyes wide. Sir, you should see this. Daniel took the tablet. On the screen, a video played. A crowded gate, a tired woman with 2 kids, a flight attendant kneeling to their level, speaking calmly. A caption scrolled beneath it. Dignity Protocol in Action. The comments were raw, emotional, grateful, angry at how rare this had been. Daniel handed the tablet back. Send that to training, he said, and operations, and the board. The analyst hesitated. Sir, people are calling you a hero. Daniel shook his head. That's not a role. That's a distraction. The analyst nodded, chastened, and left. In a courthouse 2 states away, Richard Collins sat alone in a holding room, staring at a public defender's card like it might explode. His life had narrowed to concrete walls and ticking clocks. He thought about the plane more now than he wanted to admit. The seat, the hoodie, the certainty he'd felt. He had never once wondered who else might be sitting there after him. He wondered now. That afternoon, Daniel stood in a hangar outside the city, the smell of fuel sharp in the air. A group of mechanics and flight crew gathered in a loose semicircle, arms crossed, expressions wary but curious. I won't pretend this is easy, Daniel said, voice carrying through the open space. Change never is. But here's what I can promise you. If you do the right thing, even when it's hard, this company will stand behind you. A man in coveralls raised a hand. What if the passenger threatens us? Daniel didn't hesitate. Then we document it, we act, and we back you up. Another voice called out. Even if they're powerful? Daniel met the speaker's gaze. Especially then. The crowd shifted. Something loosened. Someone nodded. That evening, Daniel finally went home, exhaustion settling into his bones. He sat on the couch without turning on the lights, the city glowing faintly through the windows. His phone buzzed once more. A message from Michael. Stock closed up double digits. Daniel stared at it, then set the phone face down. Later, as the city quieted, he opened his laptop and began writing. Not a statement, not a press release. Notes. Questions. What does dignity look like when no one is watching? How do we train judgment, not just compliance? He wrote until his eyes burned. Somewhere in the building, an elevator hummed. A door closed. Life went on. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his face, fingers brushing the scar without thinking. It was tender still, a reminder etched into skin. He didn't know how long this moment would last. Movements always met resistance. Backlash was inevitable. But for now, something had shifted. Enough to matter. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the city breathe, knowing tomorrow would bring another wave, and he would meet it. The backlash arrived quietly, disguised as concern. It started with opinion pieces written in careful language by people who had never been told to move. never been questioned about where they belonged. Words like overreach and emotional governance began appearing in headlines. Panels debated whether dignity could be enforced or whether it had to be earned. Anonymous sources whispered about instability at the top. Daniel Brooks read every word. He did it late at night, sitting at the same desk where he drafted the first outlines of the Dignity Protocol. He read slowly, not to react, but to understand the shape of the resistance. Patterns always repeated. Power hated being named. It hated losing its shortcuts. Michael Harris called just after 9. "We've got 3 board members requesting a private session," he said. "No agenda." Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes on the skyline. There's always an agenda. "They're worried about you," Michael added carefully. Daniel smiled faintly. Then they're finally paying attention. The meeting was set for the next morning. That night, Laura Bennett sat in a training room that still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The chairs were arranged in a circle, not rows. No podium, no hierarchy. She watched as a dozen crew members filed in, some curious, some defensive, some openly skeptical. She stood, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her uniform was different now. No rank stripes, no symbols of authority, just her name. "I'm not here to tell you I did everything right," she began. Her voice was steady, but she felt every word. "I'm here because I did something wrong, and the system backed me up until it couldn't." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "I mistook compliance for safety," she continued. "And I mistook silence for peace. I won't make that mistake again." No one interrupted her. When she finished, there was no applause, just a long pause. Then someone asked a question, and then another. The room leaned in. Across town, Richard Collins sat in a narrow visiting room, staring at his father through a sheet of thick glass. The man on the other side looked older than Richard remembered. Smaller. Tired. "You embarrassed us," his father said without preamble. "You embarrassed yourself." Richard clenched his jaw. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," his father replied. "You thought the world would bend because it always had." Richard looked away. "He ruined everything." "No," his father said quietly. "You did." The line went dead. In the boardroom, the tension was brittle. 3 directors sat across from Daniel, hands folded, expressions measured. "This company is under scrutiny," one began. "Your actions have made us a lightning rod." Daniel nodded. "Good." Another leaned forward. "We're not questioning your intentions. We're questioning sustainability." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Sustainability without integrity is just decay with better branding. Silence followed. "You're forcing a moral stance on a commercial operation," the first said. "That's risky." Daniel leaned forward slightly, the scar above his eye catching the light. "Every operation already has a moral stance," he said. "You just don't like seeing it written down." The third director exhaled slowly. "What happens when this costs us major partners?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then we find better ones." They looked at him, searching for uncertainty. They didn't find it. Outside the room, staff waited, not for outcomes, for signals, for whether the ground would hold. The vote never came. Instead, one director cleared his throat. "We'll revisit in a quarter," he said, "with data." Daniel stood. "You'll have it." That afternoon, an internal memo went out company-wide. Short, direct, no hedging language. It ended with a single line. "Respect is not optional." The response was immediate. Messages flooded in, some cautious, some grateful, some relieved in ways that surprised even Daniel. A flight attendant wrote, "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and this is the first time I feel like I won't be punished for protecting someone." Daniel read that one twice. Later, at a regional hub, a flight was delayed when a man refused to comply with crew instructions, shouting about status and connections. This time, the crew didn't hesitate. They documented. They acted. Security escorted him out. The flight departed without him. A passenger filmed the aftermath, narrating with disbelief. "They didn't let him bully his way through," she said. "They actually stopped him." The video spread. By evening, a different kind of headline began to appear. Passenger satisfaction climbs amid airline shakeup. Culture shift gains support. Daniel watched the numbers roll in without celebration. He knew momentum was fragile. He knew the next test would be harder. That night, he returned to the hangar alone. The space was quiet now, planes resting like enormous animals at sleep. He walked the length of the floor, hands in his pockets, footsteps echoing softly. He stopped beside a window overlooking the runway. Lights stretched into the distance, a long chain of potential. He thought of the first time he'd flown as a child. Coach. Mies pressed to the seat in front of him, his mother squeezing his hand during turbulence, whispering that fear passed if you let it. His phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Tomorrow's press cycle looks rough. You ready?" Daniel typed back a single word. "Always." He stood there a moment longer, listening to the quiet, knowing the calm was temporary. Change always invited a storm, but storms also cleared the air. He turned away from the window and headed back toward the light, aware that the next chapter would demand more than resolve. It would demand proof. The press room lights burned hot, bleaching color from faces and turning every breath into something visible. Daniel Brooks stepped to the podium without notes. He didn't adjust the microphone. He didn't smile. The scar above his eye caught the glare, a thin white line against darker skin, impossible to ignore. Cameras clicked, then stilled. The room leaned forward. He waited. Silence. Held. "This company does not exist to protect power," Daniel said. His voice was steady, unadorned. "It exists to protect people." A murmur rolled through the crowd, contained, respectful. Reporters lowered their pens just enough to listen. "We grounded our operations because the system failed," he continued. "Not because a flight was delayed, not because a seat was disputed. Because a human being was harmed, and the machinery around him tried to keep moving anyway." He paused, letting the words find their places. Somewhere in the back, a producer signaled to cut to live. The red light stayed on. "We're taught that efficiency is virtue," Daniel said. "That speed is success. But there are moments when stopping is the only moral option. Last night was one of those moments." A hand rose. He didn't take it. "I'm not here to argue optics," he said. "I'm here to set a standard. If someone is abused on our aircraft, we stop. If a crew member does the right thing, we protect them. If a customer believes money buys immunity, they will learn otherwise." He stepped back from the podium. The room erupted into questions he did not answer. He walked off with the same quiet purpose he'd brought in, leaving noise to burn itself out. Outside, the city breathed again. Traffic hummed. Sirens threaded the avenues. Life, resilient and indifferent, carried on. By afternoon, operations resumed in waves. Gates reopened, screens refreshed. Crews returned to work with new language in their mouths and new weight in their shoulders. The dignity protocol was no longer a document. It was a posture. At a regional hub, a supervisor briefed her team before boarding. "Document everything," she said. "Lead with calm, end with action." Heads nodded. A few smiles appeared, tentative but real. On another flight, a man raised his voice. The crew did not flinch. They spoke once, then again. When he refused, security arrived. The plane left without him. Passengers settled back into their seats, the absence louder than any apology. In a training room, Laura Bennett stood at the front, hands relaxed, eyes clear. "Courage isn't loud," she said. "It's consistent." The room listened, not because she wore authority, because she carried consequence. In a holding cell, Richard Collins sat on a narrow bench, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. The certainty he'd lived by had evaporated, leaving questions he'd never learned how to answer. No cameras, no leverage, just time. In a boardroom, numbers stabilized. Some partners walked away. Better ones arrived. The market spoke in its own language, and it did not punish principle the way cynics predicted. It rewarded clarity. At dusk, Daniel boarded a flight quietly. Hoodie, backpack, no entourage. A flight attendant met his eyes and nodded, professional and warm. "Welcome aboard," she said. No hesitation, no second look. He took his seat and watched the cabin fill. A mother settled her children. A man tucked a book under his arm. A couple clasped hands as the doors closed. Ordinary lives intersecting for a few hours, trusting a system to carry them safely. The engines spooled up. The plane moved. Outside the window, the city fell away in clean lines of light. Daniel closed his eyes, not to escape, but to listen. The steady rhythm, the promise of motion without harm. This was the work. Unfinished, demanding, worth it. When the plane leveled, he opened his eyes and looked forward. Not at the future as a victory, but as a responsibility. He had not fixed the world. He had corrected a course. The difference mattered. As the cabin settled into its quiet hum, the story moved beyond him, carried by every choice that followed. If this journey meant something to you, show your support with a like and a subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments with 3 simple words. Tell us more.